At Buffalo Wild Wings, they'll admit they often go overboard with their limited-time offerings. They just can't help themselves. Take their new signature sampler. You get wings and 3 shareable options like fried pickles or cheese curds. Then there's their aptly named over-the-top nachos, a literal mountain of crispy tortilla chips loaded with your choice of pulled pork or honey barbecued grilled chicken, jalapenos, and more. Then top it all off with their new Platinum Margarita. Go overboard with them today at Buffalo Wild Wings. Wings, beer, sports. Available for a limited time while supplies last. Please drink responsibly.
Mental Health News Radio, produced by MHNRnetwork.com. Your source for information about our favorite subject, mental health. This show is brought to you by our incredible sponsors like ZenCharts.com, the intelligent EHR for addiction treatment organizations, CompliancyGroup.com, making sure your behavioral health organization is following HIPAA and compliance guidelines. Remember, folks, audits are never fun, but passing them because of working with Compliancy Group helps you focus on treatment. EverythingEHR.com, devoted to helping organizations find the best electronic healthcare record software in behavioral health. And Service Dogs by Warren Retrievers, SDWR.org, a nonprofit organization that provides service dogs to those with unique abilities and invisible diseases to include autism, diabetes, epilepsy, and PTSD. Until there's a cure, there's a dog. And hey, an SDWR service dog is at work every day, making a difference with one of our own team members. Our incredible sponsors help keep this show on the air and advocating for everyone affected by mental health. Guess who that is? That's everyone in the world. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey everyone, this is Kristin Sunanta Walker. I am here with Melanie Vann, counselor and program director of Mental Health News Radio. Hey Melanie.
Hey Kristin.
And also Dr.
Hi.
Paul Meier. Hey Paul.
Hi Kristin. Hi Melanie.
Hey guy.
We did a check-in on last week's show, which we did about OCD and perfectionism, and people have just been raving about that show. So much commentary. And so we're going to keep the theme kind of going in that direction and talk about paranoid personality. I totally relate, have been there myself, but I want to start it off with you, Paul, explaining clinically, what exactly that kind of a diagnosis means or why it's given.
Okay. First of all, paranoid personalities are produced usually by being abused growing up. They can be physically, emotionally, sexually put down by a parent a lot. Imagine this. Imagine having a little puppy, a brand new puppy, and once a day you walk in and kick the puppy across the room.
Right.
When that puppy grows up, a nice person walks in the room, and what's he going to do? He's going to bite him because he thinks everybody wants to kick him.
Right.
So you would develop a paranoid dog by abusing him and kicking him across the room. And then some people are that way because it's genetic and inherited, and it involves dopamine in the brain. If the dopamine is off, then people become more paranoid. But what is a paranoid personality? And what we probably ought to do, so I don't just rattle off a lecture here, is discuss, when I list the traits, we can have a discussion about people we've known without mentioning them by name or examples that we think of or things like that.
Including
but
ourselves.
In general, I mean, we get paranoid sometimes. But anyway, paranoid personalities are arrogant, condescending, they're controlling, they hate to delegate to other people. They want to do everything themselves because nobody else can do it right. They're sensitive to criticism. They ascribe evil motives. Somebody may go and do something nice for the paranoid personality, and he'll think they're just doing it to manipulate, or they're really mad at him, or they project. Their main defense mechanism is projection.
Wow.
And so they think whatever's going on inside of them, they see inside of you, seeing the mote in your brother's eye instead of the log in your own eye. They're the top of many major corporations. Because if you go around thinking that you're better than everybody else, some people will believe you.
Yeah.
and so they'll promote you and put you in charge. Plus, they're usually pretty good at what they do. And then we can talk later about what happens. An extreme paranoid person becomes psychotic. And so we can talk about that later in the program. But there's 5 symptoms that people get before they become delusional. And then there's 2 of them that they get after. But
really?
Let's get to that later. Let's talk about paranoid personalities first.
Yeah, I mean, I have had paranoid moments for sure, just from growing up with trauma. And I know, Melanie, you have too. And thank goodness we go to therapy and we work on that stuff. And I talked last week about, or on a show actually, I talked about postpartum depression, and that threw me into a very paranoid, like kicked dog state for a while. But most of that has been reacting to someone else's paranoia and being accused of all kinds of things that you're not doing, but they're thinking that you're doing and accusing you of doing. And then your reaction to that has them tell you that you're passive aggressive or you've got problems or whatever, because it can't possibly be them.
That's right. It's we talk a lot about narcissism on our programs.
Yeah.
And there's different kinds of narcissists. Like we talked about obsessives last week. And most obsessives are really nice people that go out of their way to help others and things like that. But there's a few that are narcissistic. But paranoid personality is a type of narcissism. And, there's histrionic narcissists and passive-aggressive narcissists. And there's different personality types that become narcissistic, really self-centered. But paranoids are very narcissistic. A lot of them are real narcissistic because they're so arrogant, condescending, critical, like you just mentioned. They're critical of you.
Yes.
Especially for their own faults.
Yes, exactly. Some of them come in and tell me, our company isn't up to their standards and we're not this and we're not that. And I'm like, well, then don't work with our company. No one likes you. Go away.
Yeah.
But then I feel bad.
Good for you.
Because I know
I'm proud of you.
I mean, I feel bad because I know they're struggling and I know that they've got mental health issues, but I'm like, I am a well of information. We send referrals out to counselors all over the world for people that write in, and I will work with someone and help them find just the right person. I'll interview someone they might even be interested in or whatever. And when they tell me, no, I'm not going to go, and they continue to debase everyone, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm not being a good leader if I allow this to continue, nor am I being good to myself. But Melanie, what are your experiences with this as a clinician and personally?
Well, the paranoid narcissist makes complete sense to me. I want to start off by saying that. And I say that because someone with narcissism always has a motive. There's a motive to everything they do. So doesn't it make sense that they would think everyone else always has a motive?
Yes.
Because if they project their own feelings on other people, then they never have a pure thought. It's never about anyone else. So it totally makes sense to me that they think others are out to get them, or they just can't comprehend that others have thoughts that aren't like theirs. So the paranoid narcissist really makes sense to me. I definitely feel like I've experienced that. And I feel like just narcissistic abuse in general can really make you paranoid.
Yes.
Because it literally kind of changes your way of thought, and you just become so distrustful of others, just like Paul was saying from abuse, with kicking the puppy. If you're kicked so many times,
Yes.
then there's this innate humanness about us that needs to trust somewhere. And if that is constantly, day in and day out, breached, even in just little teeny ways, like we know narcissists do, eventually you do become paranoid of others, and you become paranoid because you don't trust your own thoughts. So I can definitely see how it works in with narcissism and narcissistic abuse syndrome. I also feel like, and Paul, I think you mentioned this too, and I feel like borderlines can be kind of paranoid. I feel like I've had several clients. I've had several clients in my office that every single response anyone has, it's about them. Mm-hmm. So they can't fathom that everything doesn't revolve around them. Just because one person said something, well, they must have been talking about me. So I feel like I've dealt with a lot of paranoid borderlines as well. But
in borderlines, like to pit people against people.
Yes.
When we admit one to I've mentioned that we have a day program where people come 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks. And if we get a borderline, then they'll tell the nurse that I don't like her, or they'll tell me that my nurse doesn't like me, or she thinks I'm stupid, or they'll pit one patient. They'll try to get the patients against staff and stir up trouble. They get bored if they're not stirring up trouble. And the more anger a person has, the more paranoid they become. So like you mentioned, Melanie, people that get abused by other narcissists or other kinds of people that abuse them, they of course get angry. I mean, any of us would get angry if we got kicked across the room. And the more anger you have, the more paranoid you become.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
Totally makes sense.
there's the physical, there, of course, there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, and so on. And, people don't take into account emotional abuse and that, or emotional overload from someone who's paranoid. I have had my times, and I still, work on this with, not taking every phone call other than my close circle of people. And I thin that circle out. Melanie and I talked about that today on our staff meeting about how we're all pruning right now. We're doing a lot of pruning in our lives. And, that if someone is constantly attacking you, even emotionally, like every conversation, there's going to be a slap of some kind, that can be one of two things in what I've experienced as a patient of mental health services. That could be that person is being gaslighted by someone who's paranoid. And so they're reacting to constantly and hypervigilant because they know that an attack of some kind is coming. Or it is someone who is paranoid and they're attacking. So I would think it's hard, Paul and Melanie, for you as a clinician to know when a patient first walks in. I would imagine it takes time to figure out, are they the abused or the abuser or both, or what is the dynamic here within this person? Are they, because I know that there have been many people that suffer from emotionally abusive relationships that will get diagnosed as borderline or bipolar or what have you, and really once they've gone through enough therapy around the trauma they experienced from an abusive relationship, that diagnosis gets changed. So Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Some paranoids really change and become really wonderful and sensitive people. A paranoid personality is real sensitive, but it's about himself, about anybody criticizing him.
Yes.
But they can become, when they get therapy, they can become very sensitive. And in group therapy, they're often the ones that can pick up if somebody's a little bit sad or if somebody's hiding something. And what I used to do outpatient therapy, where I'd see people once a week for about a year. And when I'd get a paranoid person, and I always got psychological testing on everybody when they first came in. The MMPI is, the main one that we used. And it's got a paranoid scale on it. And so if I saw they were really paranoid or I picked it up by my initial workup, I would literally tell them, according to your testing, and I'd blame it on the testing so that they wouldn't get too mad at me. Saying, I think you're paranoid. I'd say, according to your testing, you're in the 98th percentile for being paranoid. So I want you to make it, if you want therapy, I want you to make a commitment that you're going to keep coming every week for a whole year, even though you're going to hate my guts sometimes. And there's going to be times, I tell them this too, I say, there's going to be times when I look down at my schedule and I see that you're on it, and I'm going to say, oh no, John's coming today, or Sally, Sally's coming today. And I'm going to say, oh no, that person's coming today. Because there's going to be times that I'm really going to have a hard time accepting you, because I know you're going to be certain things, critical and condescending and different things. So in order for you to get help, I need to be real honest with you, and you need to be honest with me, but you need to make a commitment that you're going to keep coming even if you hate my guts. And then if they would say, if they get up and walk out, then, they're not going to get well anyway.
Right.
And if they agree to that, my goal is to love them for a year. So to love them, when they come in, I often pray during the session for insight and things like that, but pray that I can love them even though they're not very lovable for a long time. And so love them through their paranoia and be honest and interpret what you see going on until they can see it. And a lot of them become really nice people after they've had a year of therapy, but it takes a year. It takes about 9 months for them to trust you and 3 months to get well.
Right.
And Melanie, you treated a lot of paranoid personalities too. You're a counselor. Have you had any unique experiences with them, or?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, the two particular borderlines I'm thinking of, and they were just so paranoid. I felt like I spent lots of time, and they were just like you were saying, Paul. Whenever I saw that they were on my schedule, it was like, here we go again.
Oh, no.
Better catch my breath before this one, because it's exhausting, because they will come up with proof that whatever they're paranoid about is true. And you really kind of have to unravel and maybe do some cognitive behavioral therapy or something to unravel these thought processes that they're having. But I think most of the people I saw with paranoid personalities were definitely abuse victims. I mean, I can think of several instances where I had say a spouse that was maybe had a narcissistic partner or just someone that was abusive that had getting into their text, getting into their email. Mm-hmm. And it was just to the point that they literally thought that they were tracking where they went when they drove. They could hear all their phone conversations. They were getting in all their email accounts. And it started off as some type of breach of boundary. So the person that was abusing them really had broken into their email or really was going through their phone and looking at all their phone calls. And so they initially had reason to think that someone was watching them, but then it turned into this, there's someone watching me everywhere. And I guess, Paul, it's a lot of what you were talking about, like the anger or just unresolved issues that have to do with that. So as far as paranoid personality, and this is, I guess, part of just differential diagnosis, because when you're dealing with someone that's schizophrenic, and I've mentioned on the show several times that I worked with adult males with schizophrenia for quite a while. And of course, so many of them were paranoid because they were paranoid schizophrenics.
Most of them, most schizophrenics are.
Yes,
paranoid.
yes.
You're right.
Yeah, they're very paranoid, have these thought processes that really just don't make sense. And I think Kristin, I had mentioned the one patient that I had that took showers in his clothes because he believed someone was watching him all the time. And he didn't want anyone to see him nude. And so I never knew this. Every time I went to see him, when he came down the stairs, his hair was wet and his clothes were damp. And I just never asked about it. I never asked. And someone finally told me one day that was why he took showers in his clothes, because he felt like, there were cameras or something in the bathroom. So he was very paranoid. So I guess there goes the importance of differential diagnosis. And I think it's hard sometimes because I think people with bipolar can be paranoid in their mania and in their depression. I think, obviously you've got a paranoid schizophrenic, and then you've got psychoses and depression and various other things, anxiety, that can make you paranoid. But as always, a personality disorder is something that is pervasive in your life. So it really just infiltrates all of your relationships. You think everyone's out to get you. Right. You think when your dog stares at you, you think they're out to get you. I mean, really, you know what I'm saying, Paul?
You think the dog's ready to bite you.
Yes.
We used to ask him 30 years ago, if I had somebody that I wanted to find out if they were paranoid, I'd ask him, well, do you think your phone is bugged, or do you think people are reading your emails? Now what I say is, do you think your phone is bugged or somebody's reading your emails other than the government?
Right.
Because in a lot of cases, the government is.
Yes.
I have to, I've had to really think about this one, because for a year and a half after we took my biological father to court, I always felt like someone was watching me. And because I took the bus to school and I had to walk a couple miles to get to school, and I would take all these weird routes because I just always felt like someone was watching me, or if I was into my window, and I thought, I think I'm going insane. That's what I thought. And then I found out that he was watching me because I caught him a few times in his car and he would speed off. And then we found out later that he admitted that, yes, he was watching me. So sometimes you're feeling that way.
Sometimes it's insight.
I was just because of the trauma stuff and the abuse, I was very hypervigilant about everything, any rage that he would have. So I'm super sensitive to that kind of stuff. And I think when you've been around it and you were raised in it and, certainly done your therapy and your work, whenever you're around anyone that does rage at home in private with their family, you can pick that up just speaking to them. They may not rage at you, but they bite you in some way or another. And if they tell you, that they're doing that, I've had a few people, men, not really women actually 2 women, yes, that ended up telling me that they would go into rages at home. And I didn't even want to be on the phone with them, even though they didn't rage at me. Knowing that, and then their biting behavior to me and to people that I love, I instantly could feel that rage underneath every statement that they made. And I just didn't want that energy around. Does that make sense or sound a little wacky?
Yeah, definitely. This would be a good time to bring in the stuff that I mentioned at the beginning about things that happen before you go over the brink into psychosis.
Okay.
Because, that's the extreme paranoid So you get a paranoid personality, or if somebody inherits schizophrenia, they may just be real shy and become schizophrenic and become paranoid after their psychotic break. But 1 out of 33 people in the United States become psychotic sometime in their life. And most of them are depressed and become more and more paranoid, or they're paranoid personalities that go over the brink into psychosis. But 1% out of that, so 1 out of 100 becomes psychotic because they're schizophrenic and they inherit that. But the other 2 out of 3 become psychotic for other reasons, like being paranoid. But before they become delusional, there's 5 symptoms that all start with the letter A. So that's a good way to remember them.
Mm.
Right before they become psychotic, they'll have marked ambivalence is one of them that you just mentioned, Kristin. They'll be nice to you 1 minute and just go into a rage for, it just seems like no reason. The slightest little thing can throw them into a rage. You may tell them a joke and they may take it personally and go into a rage. You know, so they have marked ambivalence where they go back and forth between being nice and flying into a rage. Another thing before they become psychotic is they have, so that's marked ambivalence. So ambivalence is the A. And then another one is affective disorder. And what that means, mood, your mood, but for them it's a flat affect. Affect is your mood. So they have a blank stare. You know, so you'll have a paranoid patient that has normal eye contact and things like that. But then right before they become psychotic, they'll have a blank stare and they won't be able to cry. If somebody's able to cry, that's a sign of mental health, actually.
Really?
But before they become psychotic, they won't be able to cry. They'll have a flat affect. They'll have a blank stare. And then they have another A is loose associations. They'll have an associative disorder. And what that means in lay terminology is they'll have loose thoughts. And we all do this from time to time, start talking about something and then we lose our train of thought. But they'll be talking about something and they'll go into a different unrelated topic and not know that they transferred from one to another. And they'll do that excessively. And then, so 3 of them are marked ambivalence, affective disorder, the blank stare, and associative disorder, loose associations. And then the other 2 are anhedonia, where they can't laugh or enjoy anything, that they lose their ability to enjoy anything. Of course, everyone that's depressed has anhedonia, so that doesn't mean they're going to become psychotic. And then they have autism. They're sort of in a world of their own, and you may call their name and they won't even know that you're calling them because they sort of space out. And then when they have the break, then they have delusions and they hear voices. If they have visual delusions, it's visual hallucinations. I mean, it's usually drug abuse, but when you have a psychotic break, it's almost always hearing audible voices outside your head. It's not inner voices, you know, like obsessives have, but it's outer voices. Just like I'm talking right now, they would hear somebody talking to them and look around the room. There'd be nobody there.
Right.
And they have the delusions are either grandiose or persecutory. So they either think that they're have superpowers or supernatural insight into the meaning of life or something, you know, so they have delusions of grandeur. And then they have delusions of persecution where they think, you know, people are plotting to kill them or, you know, they're gross. They're just, it's not just mild paranoia, but they have gross delusions. So that's what happens when paranoid goes over the brink into becoming psychotic paranoid.
Yeah, I've experienced that with people. I can feel like I can see it. I'm not a clinician, so I'm not going to say I see it, but there have been many friends of mine that just based on what they're emailing or texting or posting, this is something that we work with Jonathan Bertrand of the Social Networking Effect about, is looking for trends online for people that are thinking about committing suicide. But I've seen this with friends that have said they've had psychotic episodes before, and they'll start reading very religious texts or just one extreme to the other, and I can tell, and there's nothing that you can say. There's really nothing that you can say, because anything that you throw at them, they're going to be paranoid and defensive and get angry with you. So Melanie, I wanted to ask you, how have you dealt with that when you've dealt with, let's say, a patient who's come at you and you know what's happening to them, but they're so grandiose or paranoid or whatever that whatever you're saying, they can't hear you?
It's always a difficult situation. I mean, in an extreme case, you probably would want to consider contacting a family member or maybe even taking the right steps to maybe call your local mental hospital if you're that afraid that they are in that type of place or that they are getting ready to have a psychiatric break. But sometimes you really have to give details and clarify and help them get back to a place of reality. I think I've told you before that I have kind of used CBT where I will get someone to write down, okay, column 1, let's write down your delusional thought or your grandiose thought or your paranoid thought. Let's write it down. Now in column 2, let's put evidence that supports it. In column 3, let's put evidence that doesn't support it. And then in column 4, we're going to come up with a healthier thought pattern. So sometimes breaking down those thought patterns, but sometimes people are so emotional that they can't get to that place. And sometimes you just need to let them talk it out. I've done that many a times and just kind of let them get their fear out so they can actually get to the anger or fear that's driving the paranoia. I've had a client that was, I guess, paranoid about what I was writing in my notes.
Right.
And they were always accusatory about things I was doing, or was I telling their husband, or was I telling their mother, was I telling their family about what was going on in the sessions? Well, no, this is confidential. I would remind them of what the rules were. But I've shown one client notes every time before we started. They wanted to see the notes that I had written the day before, and they have rights to those notes. Did it change what I would write in the notes? Maybe sometimes, but
a little bit,
not,
yeah.
a little bit. You know what I'm talking about, Paul.
This guy's
you know
really
exactly
crazy.
What I'm right. Off his rocker. No, and you don't ever write things like that. You may think it as a clinician, but you don't ever write things like that in your case notes. They just stay in your head. And I think maybe reading the notes for that particular client really helped.
Yeah.
It's delicate. It's delicate, isn't it?
Yeah. You don't go along with their delusions. Some people are afraid to get them mad, so they'll act like they believe their delusions. Like family members will often do that. And I tell the family members of somebody that's delusional, always use reality orientation. Don't argue with them, but when they say something delusional, just say, well, I don't happen to believe it that way. I think that you're wrong about that, but I don't want to get in an argument about it. Reality orientation. But it's really hard to persuade them. I just thought of a patient that I had who was an airline pilot for a major airline. It wasn't American Airlines. That's what I fly. But for a major airline, he was an airline pilot that actually became delusional. And he was a Christian. And like you mentioned, lots of times they become excessively delusionally religious.
Yes.
And I'm a Christian, so I'm not saying that, Christians are delusional, but like Buddhists will have Buddhist delusions, and Muslims will have Muslim delusions, and Christians will have Christian delusions. But anyway, he had some religious delusions, and he was a committed Christian before he became psychotic. And I had a pastor back then, this was a long time ago, that thought you could cure anything just using the Bible and prayer, and you don't need medication. And of course, if somebody's delusional, they're not going to get well, extremely rarely. They'll never get well without medication, and that's a different topic. But they have to have medicine that corrects the dopamine imbalance if they're delusionally paranoid. But I mean, if they're just paranoid personalities, therapy will work. But anyway, so I invited my pastor to come and try to persuade this guy that his delusions were wrong because his delusions contradicted the Bible. And so my pastor came in and talked to this guy that had been a Christian and read his Bible most of his life and believed the Bible and all that sort of thing. And he proved to the pilot that his delusions contradicted the Bible. And I was so happy when the pilot said to him, and to think all these years I thought the Bible was true. He gave up his belief in the Bible because it contradicted him. So my paranoid, my pastor finally scratched his head. He said, okay, you're right. Go ahead and use medicine. But medicine. Oh, let me tell you a really neat story, a really neat case study. There was a gal that was about 26. She had graduated from college, and she was paranoid her whole life, and she was somewhat delusional her whole life, and it got worse the older she got. And so she was actually a psychotic, chronically psychotic, paranoid. And she thought when she sat on the toilet, she was afraid a shark was going to bite her and things like that. I mean, that's pretty delusional. But she kept her delusions to herself so that she could still have friends and things, because she didn't want everybody to think she was crazy. But she thought she was right. And so she came to our day hospital because her family, brought her there, and she agreed to come. And I put her on antipsychotic medicine, the atypical antipsychotics they're called, and like Seroquel or Abilify or Zyprexa, or there's a lot of them. But I put her on an antipsychotic medicine, and we just used reality orientation with her to try not to get her too ticked off while she was there. We didn't want her to leave. But on the 8th day, she became totally normal, and she was no longer depressed, no more delusions, no hallucinations. The voices that she heard went away. She was totally normal, and some of us actually cried. Some of the staff cried with joy, because it was like she was born. She had been that way her whole life, and she was born and became a normal person. And usually if somebody's grossly delusional in a paranoid psychotic state, we can make them normal within a couple weeks on antipsychotic medication, which is just so much fun, and it's so exciting to see that happen.
Wow.
And it's just wonderful to be living in this era of psychiatry, because back when I started 40 years ago, we didn't have very good medicines that sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. Now they nearly always will do the trick.
Yeah, I would see that too, just doing the volunteer work I did, where I would see someone getting better. And maybe most of the time I was at a hospital, so it was a 7-day facility. And so there was a constant rotation since I was there every Friday. Every so often I'd see the same person, but not always. And sometimes people would come back several times, during their course of what they were dealing with. And I was always so happy when I would see someone who was really, really struggling, hearing voices, all those things, doing the skipping around from conversation and what have you. And I wasn't, I was there as a volunteer, so I would just sit there and they did what they did, and I just sat there with them, and they played with Miles, and getting them to focus on my dog was really good, because then it stopped a lot of the voices and things like that, or at least it got their attention away from it for a bit. But it was such a pleasure to come back in 6 months or 8 months, and I didn't know. I mean, it wasn't my business to know even anyone's name unless they told it to me, but to see someone really getting to a place of recovery there. I could even see it like, okay, you're back, and that's okay, but you haven't gone down or what, it doesn't matter. Anyway, you're still coming. That's the great thing. But to see them have a lighter step and not some of the behavior, definitely not the paranoia, the hiding under blankets and stuff. That was always a pleasure for me to see.
Yeah, you'll see that blank stare when they're psychotic.
Yeah.
And as they get better day by day, they get a sparkle in their eyes again. Their eyes become normal again, and they can laugh and they can cry. When we see them crying, we know they're almost well. They're getting better.
God, that's got to be such a trip to watch that take place with someone.
Some don't get better. There's some that are so severe that they just stay that way the rest of their lives. And the ones that do get better, if they're paranoid personalities that get better, because they're paranoid, they quit their medications and they become psychotic again. And then on medicine, they're no longer delusional, but they may still have paranoid personality traits. So they'll quit their meds again and become psychotic again. So they go in cycles, and like you were mentioning, you'll see them come back several times before their family persuades them to just keep taking the meds. Right,
to stay on the medication. Yeah, I'm always disappointed. Just being in the field and also struggling with my own mental health issues when it's, someone that I have been close to in some way or another, and they won't go to therapy and they're hurting people around them, or at least the ones that they get close to, especially with someone who's really paranoid, because a lot of the times they'll tell you when you first meet them that they have this problem, they have difficulties in relationships, what have you. And I'm always like, okay, well then, thanks for letting me know, and I'll be mindful of that. But I have a really hard time with someone that won't go and do the work in therapy, and they're so grandiose or just dismissive of anything you have to say, because they're rooted in that paranoia and that arrogance that...
They'll come in for marital therapy, and the only reason they come is so you can straighten their mate out.
Yes. Yeah. And some of
they
them
don't think they have any problems.
Yeah, and some of them know that they've caused trauma, and so they'll open up and say they have, and then the fact that you witnessed them at this vulnerable state means you're going to get it later, man. I'm always like, oh man, I wish they hadn't called me.
Yeah, any paranoid person that knows that he's paranoid and can recognize, it seems like people don't like me, but I know that some of them that I didn't think liked me tell me that they really do. So I know I'm probably being paranoid a lot of the time. Man, if they have that kind of attitude, they're going to get well. That's real encouraging. If they know if they're paranoid, but they know they're paranoid, that's really a good sign that they're going to get better.
Yeah. Melanie, what about you when you've dealt with that? We've talked about this in other shows, but people that, have that arrogance around them, and they're a friend. You're not their mate, so you don't have to stick around. And they're not your patient, so it's your choice as a clinician to treat that person or to refer them out. But as a friend, where you're like, this is becoming unhealthy for me now to be in this relationship. They're not doing anything to get well, and this has been going on for some while. How have you handled that in personal relationships?
Well, I think and we've talked about this before, it's just indicative of people with personality disorders to not think they have a problem. Mm-hmm. And we always talk about narcissists not wanting to go to therapy, but I think it's pretty common for anyone with a personality disorder to not want to seek help. And that is the nature of a personality disorder, because it's so embedded in their personality that they can't see it as a problem. And therefore, that is the problem. We've talked about boundaries before, and you always have to create boundaries in your life that keep you safe. I'm definitely better at it than I used to be. And we talk about this on the Empowered Empath show. You get to a certain point in your life, like for instance, right now in my life, I'm a single mom, I'm working, I have an autistic child, I've got a teenager. So my life right now requires a lot of my emotional energy. So there's only so much energy that I have, and I'm going to let out to the world around me. There'll be other times in my life when my children are grown and gone where maybe I can give a little on some of those boundaries and be a little bit more tolerant. But right now, I know what my boundaries are. Therefore, that kind of dictates the rest of my relationships. But I mean, everyone's been manipulated. I've certainly been, just completely bamboozled over feeling sorry for someone. Yep. And have been taken advantage of for my kind heart so many times, and have just gotten so deep into a relationship and then the light bulb just comes on one day that you've just completely been taken advantage of. And it's this just slow drip. So you don't even realize it when it's happening. I certainly recognize it earlier now than I used to. But I think, relationships are just hard in general.
Yes.
I think that's, sometimes they're easy. I have lots of friendships that are easy. You and I have always had an easy friendship. And I guess that's what happens when you just click with someone. But I think in general, work relationships are hard. We all just have to be grown-ups. Mm-hmm. And we have to be able to step into that level of maturity where you can communicate with another person and stand in your adulthood and stand in that emotional maturity and have an adult conversation. I have come to the point where if I'm trying to have a conversation with someone and they can't even be an adult and talk to me on a mature level, you're only going to get so far. How much more energy are you going to pour into that relationship? Because you're only going to get, so if they can't even be in their own anger or express their own feelings or can't be in that uncomfortableness, then there's really only so far that relationship can go. So I don't know, it's difficult. I wanted to talk about functional ways, I guess, that a paranoid personality disorder would present.
Yes.
Like real life situations where someone would indicate that someone was maybe paranoid. Paul, do you have any right off the bat? I think I had thought of a few. Do you have any kind of off the bat? Yeah.
Off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind is when you feel like you got to walk on eggshells around it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they're real sensitive to criticism. If you're afraid to get into conflicts, like you said, Melanie, if you're tired and wore out because you're taking care of your kids and doing all this other stuff and you got stress of your own, it's easy just to sort of walk around them and not tell them what you're thinking and things like that. But the way to protect yourself and the way to hopefully help them is to speak the truth in love, and just the reality orientation, again, we call it, where you just tell them how you're feeling. And if they get mad at you and hurt and verbally abuse you and things like that, then you just need to avoid them. And there's a passage that King Solomon said 3,000 years ago, and I think it's in Proverbs, I think it's in chapter 9 of Proverbs, where it says, if you rebuke a wise man or a mature person, they'll love you for it. You know, if Kristin told me, Paul, I really got offended when you said such and such, then I would love Kristin more for telling me, you know, something that'll help me to grow, because I don't want to keep on doing whatever it is that hurt her feelings. Means I'm going to keep doing that, hurting a lot of people's feelings without knowing it. But it says, if you rebuke a wise man, they'll love you for it. But if you rebuke a fool who's an immature person, or by the word fool in Hebrew, I think it means somebody that's immature or paranoid or narcissistic. If you rebuke a fool, they'll hate you for it. So don't waste your time with them. It's an interesting passage. There's some people that are so paranoid and so narcissistic that you don't even bother trying to help them get over it, because they're just going to hate your guts. And so don't waste your time with them.
You know, that's so interesting. I have had friendships where there's that extreme. One, you know, they didn't stay friends of mine for long, even though in the beginning they were like almost begging me to stay their friend because they've had so many broken friendships. And me being who I am, of course, I love everyone. Let me take you into my bosom. So that makes me want to love them all the more. And then over time, because I've learned how to protect myself emotionally over time, I'm like, you know what? I need my bosom for me after this relationship, so I'm out. But in other ones where someone's struggling, or maybe something I said, just an awareness, like as an example, today we had a little bit of a rough staff meeting with me being emotional, which I love because we all really care about each other personally and professionally. And I won't go wax poetic about how great it is to work in this organization. I'm sure it's the same way at your organizations, Paul, but we all just really care about each other. So today was my day to have a down moment or a sad moment or whatever. And Melanie called me after to see if I'm okay. And of course, Melanie, you all are careful in how you say things to me, just because you know how much I have on my plate, and that I am at maximum capacity in terms of I've never been this busy. I've never had this much success coming, and that's a whole new level of stress and a whole other show. But I know that you guys are careful about how you say things to me. And I know that you guys know that I go to therapy and I will find a solution. But Melanie can say, as a clinician, Kristin, you're rooted in some kind of thinking. I think it stems from your father, and you need to look at that. And I don't get offended. I feel like, thank God I work with such smart, caring, wise people that would say that to me, but I'm not paranoid. Maybe in the past I would have shame spiraled about something like that, but that's shame. That's not necessarily paranoia. But I've seen that with other people where I've said, hey, that behavior is this or this or this. And they may get angry at first, but being an adult and an emotionally competent, healthy adult, they might get angry, but they don't bite me because of it. Or bite people because of it. They'll think about it, be angry, and then they may tell me later that their first reaction was, up yours, Kristin, but then they say, you know what, thank you, really, thank you for telling me that, and they continue to be in the relationship. And that's the part that makes it easier to do that, love someone, because you know that you're not going to get punished for saying, hey, this is how you're making me feel, or punished if they have a moment of closeness with you. They're not going to lash out at you later because you saw them being vulnerable. Does that make sense, Paul?
Sure. That's really cool, because I've had friends. In fact, I've got a couple friends that I thought of when you were saying that are just a little bit paranoid, where if I confront them tactfully, or even if I don't offend them, I mean, if I'm just saying something and they take it wrong and they'll get angry at me and may get in an argument or get really ticked off. And then the next day they'll come back and say, I'm really sorry. I thought about it, and I don't know why I was doing that. I was just, sometimes they'll say even I was just being paranoid, and I'm sorry that I reacted that way. Mm. And that's somebody that's teachable.
Yeah. Yeah. When they'll say it and own it. And I mean, none of us are perfect. Melanie is anybody
Speak for yourself. Speak for yourself.
I am. How dare you?
You're just saying that to hurt me. I'm perfect, and you're just saying that to hurt me.
Melanie, if anyone has seen me wind around through, usually, I have been on the receiving end of some not so hot relationships, and she's had to watch me wind through them, and I've done the same with her, and that's part of growth and being human and what have you. But I have never felt scared to call you, Melanie, and say, okay, tell me what you think is going on. I'm actually careful. Like, Melanie has a life and she has kids, and I know that if she can't talk, she's going to say, I got to go. And I don't get upset about that. But when you're like that kind of a person, people can take advantage, especially those paranoid types, because you're such a well of empathy. I think they want to dip into that because you're going to try to tap dance around them to make them feel better and work harder to make them not be upset. And that's exhausting for you, and it doesn't help them. You're just enabling them, is my opinion. But Melanie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I wanted to share some of the things that I feel like a paranoid person would do. Just little things like always wanting to sit on the edge of a row of seats, like at the movie theater, at church. They're always going to sit near the pathway. Or someone, when they sit in the restaurant, they're always going to sit facing a door or sit where they can see out towards everyone else.
Yeah, they sit with their back to the wall.
Yes.
So they can see everything.
Yeah, so they can see. I would imagine a lot of paranoid people probably carry guns or maybe obsessed with guns and self-protection. I think sometimes paranoid people don't want to question authority, or they encourage others not to question authority. Like, you better not say that, or you never know what they might do, that type of thinking. So something that would feel very natural for you to do, they might caution you against it. Or just someone that always thinks someone's going to steal their identity, or is extra careful with credit cards or bank numbers, or someone who doesn't want to put their information online. To me, that is, everyone buys stuff online. Gosh, Paul, I hope you buy stuff offline.
Oh, I do. Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, no one can get on
it.
Right. So it does happen. Yes, people's identity gets stolen, but, and those are just little things that, and I also feel like, and Kristin, I think we've had a show about this, and I kind of laughed at it after we did the show because it probably seemed really crazy to some people or just thought we were crazy. But I've had several paranoid clients where they give me this stare, and it's like this side stare where they've got their head turned and they're just looking at me like they're trying to figure something out. And it's just this paranoid side look. Paul, have you ever gotten the paranoid side look?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
This is not in my head then.
No, you're not being paranoid, Melanie.
They're looking at you, and it's just, it's a condescending look.
Yes. Yeah. And then that in turn made me paranoid. But I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic.
I've got a question for Melanie. You mentioned earlier cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and a lot of our listening family have no idea what that is. Could you just briefly explain how you would use that? I mean, you did a little bit go into an example, but how would you use that with a paranoid person? Because that could be one effective.
Yeah.
What is cognitive? What is CBT?
Think about what cognitive is. So cognitive is our brain. And then you think about behavior. So your thoughts impact your behavior. And that is the concept behind a cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you can change your thoughts, then you can change your behavior. That's basically very simply what CBT is. So to help someone that was paranoid, if you can change their thought process, then hopefully you can change their behavior of being paranoid and acting in paranoid ways. It is widely used. Some clinicians, that's all they use. I'm definitely not one of those clinicians. I've always been kind of an eclectic type clinician where I just do what I feel like the person will respond to best. But I hope that helps people understand, Paul. You think that's pretty straightforward definition there?
Yeah, that is. Yeah. Like I've had paranoid patients that thought somebody was reading their mind from a satellite, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, what do you know that's so important that somebody would spend it would probably cost them $200,000 a year to observe you from a drone or from a satellite, to even observe you around the clock, or to listen in on your phone around the clock and have somebody, that's 3 shifts of 8-hour shifts listening to your phone. What do you know that's so important that that the government or anybody else would spend $200,000 or $300,000 a year just to find out what you're thinking? And sometimes that'll help them. Something like that will help them come to their senses. So that's sort of cognitive therapy, where they become aware of their delusions, and as a result, their actions can change.
Or just, I guess, helping them deal with their anxiety around their paranoia. And again, I think giving people tools to deal with their anxiety. I know we're getting close to time, Kristin, but this story is just so interesting. I have to share this particular case, and it was actually a friend of a friend, spouse, who was going through this. And this just speaks to paranoia that actually led to a psychotic break. The paranoia started off kind of in the workplace, where eventually this person lost their job because they just couldn't get along with anyone, because everyone was out to get them. Everyone was out to take their job. Everyone was out to ruin their project. And they just were so difficult to work with, they ended up losing their job. So therefore, they were at home all the time. It started off as the FBI is looking at my emails in the computer. And so it started off as that. And then it was somehow people were monitoring this person through their radio in their car. So instead of listening to a radio in the car, they would use like a Bluetooth device to listen to music in the car, because they thought somehow someone was listening to them through the radio in the car. Then eventually, with additional stress in their life, it turned into they took all the knobs off of the kitchen cabinets because they thought there were cameras inside the knobs. So, this person walked into this person's home and there was literally like no knobs on any of the kitchen counters. There was holes drilled into the ceiling. There was tape on all the doors. This person went to the extreme. She was so convinced that someone was watching her that she had made like a log. She had made a book of like little pieces of string or little pieces of tape that were proof that someone had been in her home. This person would sleep with the windows open at night with 10-degree weather outside, and would crank the heat up really high just to stay warm, just in case someone would come in and break in, that someone would hear them scream. That was her rationale for keeping the windows open. Eventually, this led to a psychotic break, and this person ended up in a mental hospital for at least 3 weeks. But it was obviously there was some real paranoia going on there, and you can see how pervasive it was. I mean, it was every single thing in her life. It was just this extreme paranoia that someone was watching her or gonna hurt her or something. And she was constantly looking for proof that this was happening. So it's a really sad situation. Really a sad situation. And really someone should have stepped in sooner. And it's disheartening, because I think sometimes maybe that's something we need to share with our listening family. If you see someone that is that paranoid and you feel like is on the edge, you need to reach out. You need to call someone. You need to call a clinician and try to find out what, you can do to help this person, because this person actually put her children in danger because of it. And it could have turned out to be a really scary situation. So,
and anyone that delusional, now paranoid people that are mildly paranoid and paranoid personalities need therapy. But people that go over the edge and have delusions, like the person that you just described, they have to have medication. I don't see any of them getting well without medication. And medication is amazing to bring them back to reality. It's just amazing.
Yeah. It's really a sad situation.
Well, we are at time, but I thought this was really good and really informative. So thank you, Paul, for coming up with our topic tonight.
Yeah, I thought we had so much fun with the perfectionistic personalities that it would be fun to talk about paranoid personalities this week. And there's several others we can get into in the future.
Yeah, let's do like passive aggressive. Yeah, let's do that next time.
And histrionic
the histrionic is super fun, because they're just woo. Yeah, there's some. I've got a
few of those histrionic traits. I love attention.
Yeah, Paul, you love it. We see that.
Whoever talks the most on this radio program is the most histrionic, and I think it's probably me.
I don't think so.
You're being paranoid, Paul. You're being paranoid.
Well, next week we'll cover passive aggressive, because that's something that people who are paranoid or narcissistic throw at other people, and that's just a throwaway term. No one in my life, the hundreds of people or thousands of people now with the show that know us would say that about any of us, and yet all of us have been accused of that by less than a handful of people. And it's always those relationships that are narcissistic or paranoid personality or whatever in nature, and they may put on a great front for the rest of the world, but for whatever reason they get close to any one of us, and then we get the backlash of that. So let's talk about passive aggressiveness next week, so we can really define what exactly that is. And if any of those people are listening, hopefully they're getting well, and then we'll pump some rationale into them that no, clearly that is not what any of us are. How's that?
Hopefully.
Sounds good.
We'll try. We always try. Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul, so much for coming on the show again.
It was a delight. It was fun.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, guys. Always fun.
And thanks to our listeners at Mental Health News Radio. Please join us next time on Blog Talk Radio/Mental Health News. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing from our listeners. Visit mentalhealthnewsradio.com for a list of all of our shows, and mhnrnetwork.com to check out all of our amazing podcasters on our network. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, send an email to our wonderful program director, Melanie, at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. And now a final word from our therapy dog, Miles.
Good boy.
If you want to experience moments of joy, excitement, and satisfaction, visit the Honda Summer Spectacular event, where well-qualified buyers can get 1.9% APR on the 2018 Honda Accord, part of KBB.com's 2018 Best Overall Brand. You've just entered car buying bliss.
See dealer for financing details based on 2018 brand image awards from Kelley Blue Book. Visit KBB.com for information.
Summer is here. The sun is out, and so are you. When you go, take along a clever little app called Audible, so you can listen to the stories you love while doing the things you love outside. A walk, a run, the pool, or the beach, all better with Audible. For just $14.95 a month, you get a credit good for any audiobook from the world's largest selection. If you don't like it, exchange it anytime. So get outdoors with Audible. Start a 30-day trial, and your first audiobook is free at audible.com.